This is Digital Wellness. We're talking about working home with distractions. We're going to dive into tech distractions and other distractions that are all happening in our life. I know the outside world provides a lot of distractions, but there's a lot of them in your home either as well. So we're going to have some practical tips to help you better cope with this new working environment due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're covering everything from working from home with children. We even got pets in there. We're going to spend some time doing some nuts and bolts, some logistics and specifics through apps and software and these tech tools. So I'm going to go into like plugins and apps and all sorts of things to help use tech to fight tech. We're also going to talk about some of the psychology of our focus and productivity and give you some brain tips. And we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end, and we have some references and resources for you. So we will get going here on this digital wellness. So digital wellness partly means being able to balance your real life and your tech life. It's being able to say stop or go or helping focus through distractions. All of that is part of digital wellness. And it's hard to sometimes have that digital wellness when we are in situations where our work life and our personal life are all shoved together. So we're going to give some tips on that one. It's hard. It's wonderful and tough because there's no boundary. So you have to be really, really cognizant of setting your own boundaries with family, with kids, with everything going on, or it's just going to bleed together, which can cause an additional stress. So it's wonderful. I mean, I am on top of my laundry, that is for sure, working from home, but it's also tough that it's all bleeding together and you often interrupted. So working from home with children. So there are so many working parents that are dealing with this right now. And a lot of parents have just said, no, I can't do that. I was listening on NPR the other day that said that women's labor workforce participation is as low as it was in 1988. There's been that many women that have dropped out of the workforce due to the pandemic with kids at home, remote learning, all of it, because it's just too much. And I get that. And these are tips that, I mean, they're hard, and this is not for everyone. So I want to make that statement that a lot of people, they're doing their best, but sometimes you got multiple kids, you got remote learning and work, and you just have to decide what's best for your family. So I'm going to share some tips here, but I just want to say that this is tough. And there's been over 1 million women that have dropped out of the workforce since in the last few months. And then in that realistic expectations. So when I say realistic expectations, part of that depends on the age of your child, understanding where your child is developmentally, how they eat, how they sleep. Working with children, if you have kids that are nappers or they are, I call them foragers, especially the toddler age, they are just foragers. They will eat at any time and they will run around and they have different schedules than you. So when I say realistic expectations is understanding that they're not necessarily going to take a nap when you want them to take a nap. They're not going to eat when you want them to eat. The older kids, there can be a little more balance in that, but understanding like, okay, well, I can't assume that a nap is going to happen. I can't assume that this is going to happen. And so making your schedule with a lot of flexibility and leeway, working with those kids. And you know your kid better than anyone else. And some kids are just different than other kids. And there's some kids that will be at your door. And there are some kids that are happy that you are away and they get away from you. You just don't know that. So setting realistic expectations for working with children is kind of the first step. But here are a lot of other suggestions, and this goes back to the realistic expectations. If you have a very young child, they just can't be left alone. It's just how it is. I joked when my child was a toddler, he had a death wish. I mean, you just couldn't look away when he was about 18 months old. It was into something. One time he climbed to the top of the pantry because he figured out that's where we had the sugar, and he got into the sugar. I did not expect that. I had the door closed. I thought I was all good. I was just literally 10 feet away and he was climbing on top of the pantry. So sometimes you just have to not work when kids are there. And so if you're lucky enough to have a job that you can work at home with weekends, early mornings, evenings, that might be the best option for some of those age groups there. I mentioned this with also being flexible, having tasks in very small chunks. Just chunk everything. It's harder to get that longer period of time for work. And then a fun fidget box. So I like to say, like, make a barrier between you and your workplace. So that barrier could be a closed door. That barrier could be I did this webinar with a bunch of with librarians who are working with home, and one of them told me that she would just like put a trail of like cookies and snacks. So it would take a while for the child to get through all the snacks and give her a few more minutes before they got to the door. But having a fidget box and saying, you cannot knock on, if you are bored, here you go. So go to the dollar store, go buy a bunch of stuff, put a box on the door, and just be very clear, like, hey, if you are bored, that's not my issue. Here's a box. Here you go, right here. This is the last box. If you can't now, and only contact me if you have other situations. So a fidget box can be a way for those kids, because sometimes there's no emergency. They're just bored. They're just bored. So and you can practice this, and this, depending on the kid and the age and all of that, some of this is better for younger kids, is role play. Say, okay, so you're hungry and I'm on the phone. What do you do? So what are your options here? Okay, so you were hungry. What snacks can you get? Where do you get the snacks? How do you find the snacks? Okay, if you're bored, what are some things you can play with? What are your favorite things in this box? So walking them through the process with role playing can be more helpful than when you get into that situation. So this is a question: what's the best way to get my attention? Is that yelling? No. And this also means if they are acting out inappropriately, like, mom, like they're not dying, then you just don't respond. Like that isn't the way to get my attention. To slam on the door is not the way, because if you do give them attention every time they do that, you're reinforcing the bad behavior. So role playing some of these scenarios is helpful, and then making them clear, like if you are sick, or there's there are situations you can always get me, but boredom and hunger is not one of them. So other suggestions is keeping your pets occupied. And I have a weakness for adorable little videos online of like cats like grabbing keyboards and dogs pushing their nose up to get a treat. I mean, they're adorable, but they're distracting. So, don't forget the pets. And so I was listening to another radio show talking from a veterinarian talking about they're seeing some incidences with pets as people are going back to work, and the pets, maybe they adopted a puppy during this pandemic. The puppy got tons of attention. They got out on walks 4-6 times a day, and all of a sudden that's like nothing. So like your kids, what kind of behavior do you want to see from your pet? If you set them up with the expectation that they're going to be walked every hour, well, then they're going to act out too, just like a toddler would. So having those boundaries as well, because eventually you might have we will get out of this and you might be gone more. So if you are responding every single time your pet wants something and every single time your toddler wants something, you're creating some really unhealthy expectations and boundaries and routines that you might pay for a little bit later. And vets have already seen some dogs and cats and animals acting out because they don't know what to do because their owner was home all day and now they're not. And that's a big change for a pet too. So whatever, you can occupy them, get them certain toys, have them on a very strict schedule when they're taken out, so they don't like ask you all the time to be taken out. So think of that too as pets. And I sometimes our little kids are a little bit like pets too. You can't always reward the bad behavior. Don't reward the barking. Don't reward the screaming as well. So those are some suggestions for the people in your home. But let's be honest here, some of the biggest distractions is your ability to focus, your ability to deal with tech distractions, your ability to focus. It's you. And yes, don't get me wrong, kids are huge distractions, but we can't always control what they're doing, but we can control what we're doing. So I'm going to share a bunch of specific apps and resources and then some other strategies to help you stay focused through technology. Because if you're at a screen all day, that screen has amazing, wondrous entertainment that may be much more appealing than what you're doing right now. So we're trying to use tech to fight tech, as I said. We're going to have this be a help instead of a hindrance, which it sometimes is. So this is Mila. I read a lot online. That's kind of my thing. I'm not a huge YouTuber. I like to read, but I get down article rabbit holes or like Wikipedia rabbit holes or that kind of rabbit holes. So um, being able to say, I'm going to read that later, I'm going to look at that later is helpful for your focus. So Pearl Trees is one example. That these are offline reading list apps, and Pearl Trees is free, but some of these, like, they have a premium service and they're kind of freemium, so take that as it will. But you can organize some of your acts and content on Pearl Trees, like categorize it and then come back and revisit it. Feedly does the same thing. It can organize those blogs. So if you remember back in the day with RSS feeds, I'm old enough to remember a Google RSS feed, and it would curate all my blogs. This is in the golden age of blogs, like 2009, right? It was a golden age of blogs, but it was great. I really liked my RSS feed, but Feedly does similar type of work. When a new blog post comes up or article comes up, it can like save it and organize it for you. Pocket, and if you ever use Firefox, you'll see Pocket often on the front page of Firefox because it works with Mozilla. It is a subscription-based service, but it's a permanent personal backup of articles. So you can pay for it. It's always there to read offline. Pocket also curates a lot of articles on different topics for you. Pearl Trees, you kind of do it yourself, but Pocket does it for you as well. So these are kind of helpful tips. If you are like me and love to read various different articles and magazines and news sources to save for later. If you need something a little harder here, so I'm going to give you some gradations here. If you're just, occasionally distracted by the article, those are great ones for save for later. But if you need a little more heavy duty stuff, maybe you need a blocker. And you're like, well, I'm an adult, I don't need a blocker. Well, you might. Adults are bad at this just as kids. I mean, we all get, we lose our focus. So these are a list of different blockers out there. So on them, you can block specific websites. So social media is a problem. You completely block Instagram. You cannot access it on your desktop. So maybe you can access it on your phone, but not your desktop. You've stopped it. And I like the name of that, freedom. When you sometimes take control of your own usage, it does give you more freedom. I know, it sounds weird that way, but the self-control is one free for map. This can also be a website blocker. You can add things to different lists. Now, if you want to go hardcore on this list, the biggest one is called cold turkey. So if you break the rules that you set on cold turkey, this is for Windows. I don't know if it's on Mac, but I know it's on Windows. It shuts down the computer. It locks you out. It is like done. You have to wait to get back in. You're out. So if this is a big issue and you really want to learn how to break your habits, cold turkey might be the one for you. So these are software, and some of these are free and some of these are not free, but you can also get browser extensions that will do some of this work for you. So Chrome has a ton of different browser extensions. These are just a small amount of ones that will help you block, stay focused, all sorts of those things. They might track your time. They might help you with those lists of websites to block the sites. They can give you a history of what you're doing. These are just a small selection of them, and I think they're all free. I'm pretty sure they're all free, but I made this a couple months ago, and sometimes in the world of apps, things change quickly. But browser extensions on Chrome can help you stay a little focused too. Or maybe you might even want to put these on your kid's Chromebook. If your kid has a Chromebook from school and they're having issues with staying focused with homework, you can put maybe some browser extensions on their own computers too. So those are ones on Chrome. But there are also some browser extensions on Firefox, on other browsers as well. And these are some kind of cool ones, I think. So Noisily, these are a little different. So background noise. So I have like a Pandora stations of different stations that they're not words, or they're just kind of low key. But if you want like white noise or something, or like a nature sound, that can really help, especially if you've got other people in the household or as I said, barking dogs and screaming children. You've got TVs blaring, you've got whatever going on in your house, having some background noise. And what I have found is that, so I've used Pandora for like 6 years, the premium account, and created my own. I have several stations, and it's like a mental thing for me. When I turn on that particular station, it is time for research. It is time for writing. It is time for deep work. My brain has learned that I associate the sound with this activity. So it took me a while to kind of get into that, but now it's like I only listen to certain Pandora stations when I'm doing certain work, and now I've made the connection and it is easier for me to focus. So think about your noise landscape as well as like your office desk landscape, because it is part of the environment. Other ones, you probably see these ads all the time. Grammarly can help you save time. And then I like this one. I've used it before, Reading Time. And sometimes there's news sites that will tell you, oh, this is a 3-minute article, but that's also a plugin that says, oh, this is 7 minutes. And you're like, okay, can I do 7 minutes? No, I can't do 7 minutes. Let's put it on Pearl Trees and save it for later. And if you really want to go hardcore, just like cold turkey, there's different newsfeed eradicators. You eliminate the newsfeed. You only get inspirational quotes. And there's some people that have like hacked, like make it cats or something. But if you just want to, you really need something a little stronger there to eliminate your newsfeed. That's a way to do it there. So I've been mentioning plugins. Here are some more plugins as well that you can use as browser extensions. So max tabs. So tabs, when I talk about tabs, I mean how many things you've got pulled up at once. If you've got 20 things at once, well, you probably have something from 2 weeks ago that you still have never closed. Not only is that like a privacy issue because you got things running on a background, it can cause your computer to slow down, but it also causes distractions. You really want to limit the number of tabs that you have open. It's just too easy to flip over. So these extensions actually stop. They block you. If you're on Firefox and you have max tabs, not going to open. You get a number and it's like, nope, not going to do it. And I mentioned some read for later, but there's also browser extensions. You might be doing this. You can bookmark things, add things to reading lists. You can kind of compartmentalize. You can put things in categories, and so you can ignore it. It's not the best for any of us to have 20 different tabs. And I sometimes I've seen a few people computers, and it's like a sink full of dirty dishes to me. I'm like, how could you work with 20 different tabs open? But that's a helpful way to help distracting. Only a few tabs at a time. Close it if you're not using it. But technology, if you're struggling with getting that, technology can help you too. Okay. So other tech suggestions. So when I say accountability partner, so if you have a friend, a family member, someone, maybe it's even your kid who's struggling with online homework and focusing, and maybe you're struggling with online work and focusing, that you work together to say, hey, from 3 to 4, we're doing this. We're going to do it together. We're not getting off. Or it could be like checking in. So think of maybe when you've created New Year's resolutions to lose weight, maybe you have an accountability partner that encourages you on, like, hey, how's the weight loss going? How's the diet going? How's this? And they check in on you and you check in on each other. That's what habits can be hard to break. And what basically I'm teaching you here is helpful tips to break some bad tech habits. And sometimes we need another person to help that. So timers, and I'm going to talk about time a little bit more in this webinar, but just be easy on yourself. It takes a short amount of time to create a bad habit and a longer period of time to stop it. So treat it like a muscle that you have to build it over time. So maybe in the beginning, you need something like cold turkey that shuts your computer down, but then hopefully you need less and less of these plugins and help, and you can just do it on your own. So give yourself some patience and time. We're all in some rough situations. So I talked about the tech side of it, and now I'm going to talk about the brain side of it. As I mentioned earlier, you are your own biggest distraction at the end of the day. So we're going to talk about prioritizing tasks. Now, this is an issue, especially with remote work, because you don't have someone in the next room telling you what to do. Your boss is maybe far away. You don't have as many check-ins. You don't see people. You don't see a teacher to remind you of things. Kids don't see the teacher all the time. So that means you have to work even harder at time management and prioritizing tasks. So we're gonna talk about some research-based suggestions to help you prioritize. So this is an activity we actually do, Digital Respons-Ability does with teenagers. We talk a lot around sleep because lack of sleep affects a lot of our digital habits. I mean, I say nothing good happens at 2 a.m. if you're 14 and you're on your phone. I mean, it's just not, if you're tired, you're more likely to engage in unhealthy habits, that you're doom scrolling or bullying or whatever it is. So sleep is so important. But when I talk to teens about this, I talk about how we have a chronotype. And it's like a genotype. You are born, you have some genes, and there's environmental factors that affect this, of course, too. But we are kind of one way or the other. We're born kind of early birds or night owls. Now you can switch it up a little bit, but your chronotype is fairly set. I see this in my kid, 5 a.m. for the first 6 months of life, 5:30 a.m. for the first 2 years of life, and now we're at 6 a.m. and he is on the dot, 6:15. He is an early bird. So, and that's always how he's been, and he will dip, and that will change when he's a teenager, but it will probably go back up again because teenagers are a unique time. So what is your sleep cycle? I have teenagers map out my sleep cycle. This is mine. I'm up between 4 and 5:30 roughly. I get a surge of energy and then I start crashing down around 3 or 4. It's just a long crash. So understanding your sleep cycle, your chronotype can help you kind of hack it a little bit, can help you be more productive. Now, unfortunately for the world, we are set up for early birds. But if you are not an early bird, this is tougher, but that also means you need to be a little more creative on when you're scheduling the most important work. Now, when I say most important work, I'm referring to this concept of deep work. Now, deep work can be different for anyone, but these are the ones that you really, really have to focus. You cannot be interrupted. So if I'm scheduling deep work, I'm going to schedule at a time where I don't got a bunch of kids at home. I'm going to schedule it at a time in the morning because I'm an early bird when I'm most productive, and I'm not going to push it. If I don't get it done in the morning, it doesn't get done because I'd rather push it back another day than do it poorly and have to do it again. So knowing your sleep cycle and understanding this concept of deep work. You might have heard the term flow before. This is like flow. You're like in the moment, fully concentrating, and you're pushing your brain. And I like to say deep work versus shallow work. Deep work is like a sprint. You are using all of your brain capacity and you are tired by the end. If you are doing a deep work, you might feel exhausted even though you've just been sitting in a chair. Shallow work is a little less. You can do this while you're distracted a little bit and there's a little bit more noise. So I recommend, and I have found this to be extremely helpful in my own personal life, to separate all your tasks between deep work and shallow work. Now this is like my list, but your list may be different because it depends on what your job is and what you do. So I deep work or things like writing. It takes you really got to concentrate to create. When you're creating something, when you're making something, that's deep work. When you're, I'm kind of buying or I'm grading. I shouldn't say that to my students. I'm grading. I'm kind of halfway focused there, whatever it is. So versus shallow work. Now, just breaking it into tasks can help you prioritize. And then I can say, okay, well, this deep work, I need to schedule this at certain times of the day. And then the rest of the day, I schedule shallow work. And it really makes you much more productive. So whatever your categories are, think through it. And and when you are tired by the end of it, you're tired, but also a little bit energized. You're like, oh, I got stuff done. That's probably deep work. If you're shallow work, you're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. You're not really thinking that's your shallow work. So like I was saying, our brains, a deep work is a sprint. Think of it as a physical thing too. Your brain is part of your biology. It can only handle so much. So you want to use it strategically. It's like you work out on certain times of the day and not on other times of the day. You're not going to be lifting weights for 8 hours. That could hurt you. That makes sense. So think of it this way and strategize better. Work smarter. So here are some tips to work smarter. So I already mentioned knowing your chronotype, knowing when you're awake, knowing when you're tired. I mentioned categorizing deep work and shallow work, but here are some research-based ways to take a break. So this is from one productivity app, 52 minutes work, 17 minutes break. You do need breaks. Now, sometimes when we get into the flow, when we get to some of that deep work, we can just go longer than that. But in general, for most people, this is, we're kind of working around a sprint. You need a break here. So there's also, you might have heard this Pomodoro Technique. It was initially created by a chef who had a little tomato timer, and that's where this technique kind of came out there. So this research from the productivity app says 52 minutes on, 17 minutes off. Pomodoro breaks it up a little bit longer, but a Pomodoro helps you grow that muscle and grow that focus. So you have a task, and usually it's about 25 minutes. Then you have a break, and then you go again. So this chunks it a little bit more, and then you can take a longer break after 4 Pomodoros. So you're working like 2 hours roughly there. So you can build it up. So maybe I'm just doing 1 Pomodoro, then I'm doing 2, then I'm doing 3, then I'm doing 4, then I can grow it a little bit more. And maybe you kind of get into that deep work in the flow, you can go a little longer, right? So focusing on growing it longer a little bit at a time can really help you get that productivity. And part of the reason we really, really want to focus, and why I say that this is more productive and we want to work smarter and not harder, is that your brain struggles with multitasking. So I used to be a librarian at a public reference desk, and so I remember all the time people at the desk, can I have this? And so I'd work for like 2 minutes and I'd help someone. And I'd work for 2 minutes and help someone. And I remember sometimes at the end of like my shift on the desk, I'd be like, oh, I'm just worn out. And I didn't even like get much done besides helping people, because every time I would help someone, I had to shift here and then I had to shift there. And it took me a while to shift back and forth, and it's exhausting. So that stat I have there is that shifting between tasks can cause mental blocks and take up to 40% of someone's productive time. Honestly, it might have been better if I just said, I'm not going to work on the desk, because it was like so frustrating to me. So, but what I did learn over time as a librarian is I only had very specific shallow work I would do on the desk. I wouldn't do any deep work because it was just too frustrating. So we're not good at multitasking. I mean, we think we are. It feels good. This is some of the issues with our mobile phones as we pick it up and we're like, oh, we're jamming. We're like checking here. We're checking our Twitter account. We're watching. We feel productive, but we're not actually being that productive. And it's really smarter to just single task instead of multitask. You're spending about the same amount of time, and you might be producing better work when you're not doing all that multitasking. So I've been talking about stress a little bit. If you want to dive into stress and deeply, we're going to have another webinar next month where we're going to talk about burnout, especially teacher burnout. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but mental stress is a thing. Being distracted, being interrupted, having those lack of personal boundaries and work boundaries is stressful. We're all under a lot of stress. I mean, I've seen the stats. We have increased rates of mental health visits. Therapists are booked solid. We're all a little bit stressful. So I asked you to think about your chronotype. I asked you to separate between deep and shallow work, but also create a list of what you do, or think about it, of what you do to relieve stress. And this is different for everyone else. If you have a way that relieves stress, you can feel free to put it in the chat box or share your thoughts. Everyone's different the way you relieve stress, but I do caution that sometimes if we are trying to stay focused, we need a little shorter stress relievers. So what's something really you can do in maybe 10, 20 minutes to relieve stress rather than in 2 hours? So I love taking a walk. I take a walk most days, but I have to be really careful on how I structure that walk throughout the day, because I don't want to put it in the middle of something else. So if you can make a list of like shorter and longer stress reliefs, those are just some suggestions I have. If you have any, you can add it as well. So, but adding an online break, we put all those things in those reading lists in the Pearl Trees or what pocket or whatever it was, and then come to it later. Maybe on YouTube, you can easily create folders and categorize them. Just create like a fun little folder in YouTube, and you don't watch the video then, you watch it later. And then you can do that in like 20 minutes or less. That's a quick little online break. So we've been talking about tech, how we can help with stress. We've talked about our brains and how our brains work. And now this last section, we're going to talk about environmental changes in our work environment. Now, I've talked a little bit about this in terms of like noise in the background, in terms of like having different plugins and apps to help adjust our environment, but I'm talking some non-tech environmental changes here because a little bit can make a difference. If you are a fan of a lot of this productivity work, CGP Grey does a really great podcast. If you're familiar with some of his stuff, he does like Hello Internet and some others, but it's called Cortex, and it's almost all about productivity tips. And he had a really great podcast on how adjusting things on your desk and these environmental changes can really help your mindset. So what he suggested, let's say like I am a student and I don't have a lot of room and I have like a table. He said, well, do this work on one side of the table and then get up, shift your computer, do it on the other side of the table. Small environmental changes can really help our productivity. So first of all, this is a tough one. Watch your posture. I'm struggling with this as well. So I think we all are. We kind of slowly crouch during the workday there. But if we want better posture, here are some tips. Feet flat on the floor. So that might mean you need to adjust your chair or not, but having your feet flat on the floor, that's like a base for some good posture here. Use a footrest. If you are a short person, then it's better to use a footrest than do something else. So I've even seen some like footrests that move up and down. Maybe you can get a footrest that massages your feet. That'd be cool. Whatever it is, try to keep your both feet flat on the floor. Monitor arm's length away. Now this is hard, and I'm not always good about that. My hands like go down on my wrists, because you have to keep it upright. But I don't know if any of you are piano players, but I used to play piano, and they would have me do the same thing. And my piano teacher would actually have me do exercises where I would have to pull up my hand, and she'd swap my hand a little bit if I didn't do it right. That'll reinforce it. So you want your hands up like you're a piano player, and you want them a little further out. Just kind of thinking like you're playing piano on your laptop there, along with your feet. And I have kind of old-fashioned illustration, but it's true. You can have your ears, shoulders, and hips stacked in line. This is good for standing. Try it as well. Stacked in one line. Your head isn't protruding forward. This is something I struggle with because I often work at a laptop and the screen is smaller. So I bend forward a lot with my head and then not crossing your ankles and legs. So we don't always notice our posture issues until the end of the day or week after week of this. There's already issues of screen neck of people looking at their cell phone day to day. But if we have more screens and we have remote work, this issues of posture become even more important there. And this is tough stuff. So maybe just get your accountability partner to swat your hands every time you mess up there. And I mentioned this earlier, separating your work from home. And now it can be very, very subtle. This is what I always do when I work from home. If I am eating, I never eat at my desk. I leave the room, I go downstairs at the kitchen table and I eat. And I don't do work at the kitchen table. And then I shut it down and I go back upstairs. Now, could I easily eat at my office desk? Yeah, it would be no problem. I could do that, but it's a mental thing. It's like the certain Pandora stations and music that you have. It's environmental. It's a little trick. So I don't know if any of you were like me. I still sometimes struggle with this. I chewed my nails and it was a bad habit. And so my mom would, try to remind me, but it's unconscious. So a lot of these bad habits, we don't realize we're doing them. So I was one of those kids that got like the bad painted, the tasted bad on my nails. She painted like, it was like onions or something on there. So what you have to recognize is that we only have so much willpower. I said our brains get tired. We lose our focus. It is hard to keep up with good habits and not chew your nails, keep your posture. So we need a little help. We need a little bad nail polish. We need to change our environment to make those fixes to make it easier on our brains. I think humans have proven that we don't have quite the willpower. No one would be overweight, and everyone would go to the gym, and we'd all meet our New Year's resolutions every year, but we don't, because habits are hard to break. So part of that is like getting dressed, having certain environments, sounds, opening windows, closing windows, moving to other side of using a different chair. Maybe have an office chair and a different chair. Whatever it is, separate it. Find a separation in your own way. So I am wrapping up here. I've been throwing a lot of information at you, but I'm going to go through some references and resources, and you are welcome to put your questions and answers. I do want to flip over a little quick and mention this again, this other webinar that we have coming up. We dive into some of the stress topics, and teachers are dealing with a lot of stress. I mean, there's some statistics out there that they're pretty rough. Teachers are sometimes working in person and online. They're dealing with parents and administrators. They're trying to adapt constantly and pivoting constantly in a changing environment with their own distractions at home. So we actually are bringing on the managing director of Mindfulness Utah. So we're going to do this together. I'm going to go over some tech tips, and she's going to go over some mindfulness tips to help your brain as well. It helps your brain focus. I mentioned some ways to help your brain focus, and she's going to share some as well. And that's on December 8th. If you aren't signed up for our newsletter, we also send out some mindfulness and other tips to really help that brain. So I'm going to circle back to some of the references. If you are interested in the topic of deep versus shallow work, Cal Newport wrote that book, but there's also some great articles out there. I really like this Atlantic article on how many minutes you should take a break for work there. And there's some office ergonomics. Get a better chair. I've actually been looking at some other office chairs, but I did not realize how pricey those are sometimes. Thinking I want a gaming chair, but they're not cheap. But that being said, if you're 8 hours in a chair, it might be worth it. So this is my information and Digital Respons-Ability's website. We are doing free webinars every month. We also have some archived webinars. Last month, we talked about technology and media literacy. We are doing, as I said, teacher burnout. We're also going to have more in January and next year. So every month you'll find a free webinar, and they are archived there for you to view at other times. So I will kind of start wrapping it up and turn off the stop recording. I wish you all luck. This is a tough topic, and I hope that this can help you all be a little more digitally well and feeling great in these really stressful times. So thank you.